Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
If you want to pull the party, the major party that is closest to the way you're thinking, to what you're thinking, you must show them that you're capable of not voting for them. If you don't show them you're capable of not voting for them, they don't have to listen to you. I promise you that. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party because the left had nowhere to go.
Yes, that is Lawrence O'Donnell that you just saw, the same Lawrence O'Donnell who these days is over there shilling for MSNBC. This is back before he had that gig. When he actually had the ability to speak his mind, he wouldn't dare say those words today because MSNBC is, in all but name, an auxiliary of the Democratic Party. The same way that Fox News was created as an auxiliary of the Republican Party. Now, the reason that I showed that is pretty obvious. All these other groups, they understand that a ballot is a weapon. It can be used as a sword or a shield. Now, the problem with black folks is we don't use it as either. We just basically give it away, and that's not the way you do it with a ballot. A ballot is precious. It works if you decide that you're going to use it. On the other hand, if you decide to merely obey, then a ballot becomes nothing. It becomes worthless. In fact, it actually hurts you. Everybody understands this. That's the reason why they're not scared to withhold their vote. They know how powerful it is. The very first video that I posted here was about Ronald Reagan and how he was butthurt that African countries voted to recognize Communist China as the legitimate government of China back in 1971 and made them a permanent member of the UN Security Council. The reason that Reagan was mad was apparently there was some sort of behind-the-scenes deal that these countries were also going to allow the U.S. proxy Taiwan, which calls itself the Republic of China, to also be recognized by the UN. But instead, those African countries said, no, just Communist China. And that incident was what prompted Reagan, in a recorded conversation with Richard Nixon, to go on a tirade about how those African countries who thwarted the U.S.'s attempt to legitimize its proxy were dancing on the floor of the UN, and Reagan was calling them a bunch of monkeys as a result. Reagan's racism was no surprise to anyone, but the white right lied for decades, and they acted like this guy didn't believe that black people were inferior. And Reagan, even though he was racist as hell, well, Ronald Reagan, he's just misunderstood. But after that recording came to light, those same white conservatives were saying, well, what do you expect? The guy's like 100 years old, and he was a man of his time, etc., etc., etc. You can't expect any better from him. Now, Reagan's predictable racism aside, the reason that I decided to make that the subject of my very first video on this channel was because of what Reagan said. He said that the U.S. should refrain from taking part in the UN voting process, and as a result, be exempt from whatever votes the UN decided to make. There's precedent for this, by the way. Imperial Japan withdrew from the UN's predecessor, the League of Nations, which was a pivotal event that preceded the League's collapse. When a group withdraws from a process that they see as illegitimate, that undermines the process, more so if that group is wise enough to pursue their own interests, like, say, bringing pressure at the state level for cash reparations. As I've always said, withdrawing from an election process that isn't offering you anything and it's rigged against you, that doesn't mean we just sit at home doing nothing, quite the opposite. We continue to fight, only this time everyone recognizes that when they come to us, they can't do it with the expectation that we're going to listen to the Democrats because of LBJ, or we're going to listen to the Republicans because they're the party of Lincoln. What's happening here, this ongoing argument about whether or not black people should shamelessly, slavishly vote for nothing, or whether or not we actually decide to think before we vote, this is actually part of a much larger, much more important discussion. And that is whether or not we're going to exercise true self-determination. That's what's really going on here. That's what the actual heart of this argument is about. Whether or not we act in our own interest, or if we continue to be an auxiliary of everybody else's interest. And there's a lot of people who have made a hell of a lot of money and acquired a lot of power by us being politically naive and foolish in this regard. After I posted my video showing how both Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris have done phony black sense whenever they got in front of black audiences, the shills came out of the woodwork like so many cockroaches. You can tell when you've hit something sensitive and the DNC commands their shills to go out and attack us. It was shill rage on full display. Lurkers who follow me on Twitter but never commented until I put up that side-by-side video showing Hillary doing an insulting black scent during her 2008 presidential campaign, and then next to her Kamala Harris doing the same today. See, we have legitimacy because we're black. And we've been out here for 15 plus years. We're not some anonymous bot account that just popped up 3 months ago and is posting angry messages online. We're not just a threat to these do-nothing Democrats, but also to their shills. We're educating the people on how this machine of anti-black racism actually works, who's operating the machine, and how to spot their agents and operatives. And that means we're making it harder for the shills to do white power's dirty work. And that includes normalizing and reinforcing the cycle of abuse. Whenever the roly-polies talk to us, he curses and insults us and calls us every name in the book. Now, how is that different than the Republicans and the slimy anti-black rhetoric that they peddle? This is supposed to be the people who claim that they respect us? We're demanding things that will force changes on the system. That's the problem. Roly-poly and his ilk's job is to make sure that never happens. We're presenting the bastards with an existential crisis, and as white power has shown, being a bootlick is a career path that doesn't come with a retirement plan. If these white powers that be see the roly-polies and the D.L. Hugleys and the breakfast schlubs and others simply aren't able to corral us, they're not able to control us, then they will discard them. The same way they did all of those Negroes who were on white cable after the Obama years. As Obama's presidency began to enter its twilight years, the white media gave those black bootlicks a pink slip. And that's the way it went for them. It was unapologetic. And yeah, you had the Melissa Lacewell Perrys and others who were all butthurt about it, but the white media didn't care. She ranted, raved, wrote angry letters, and it changed exactly nothing. She had spent years propping up the white media, and as a result, they could kick her out the door, and they didn't have to fear any consequences because who the hell did Melissa Harris, Lacewell Perry, whatever the hell her name was, actually represent? She represented the white consensus, and that being the case, she had no power over them. You need people who are against them if you're going to try to leverage that kind of thing. That's the reason why when Tiffany Cross was given the boot, there was nobody to stick up for her. Nobody was going to quit on her behalf, and absolutely nobody at the network stuck up for her. Not Joy Reid, not Simone Sanders. So much for the sisterhood, huh? These tools served their purpose, and when white power no longer needed the tool, it broke those tools. Anyone seen Bakari sell out lately? How about April Ryan? There's still an APB out on Melissa Lacewell Perry. Ditto for Goldie Taylor. Don Lemonade thought that he escaped the axe, but he hadn't. They had his pink slip made out well in advance. They were just waiting for any small, trivial thing they could exaggerate into a scandal to justify getting him out of there, and that's exactly what happened. The bootlicks like to tell themselves that they're the smartest guys in the room, that because they keep their heads down and repeat Massa's line as loud as they can, somehow they're playing the game and winning it. But the game always ends the same way, with them losing. And it has to go that way because they spend all their time propping up Massa, reinforcing Massa's power, and because Massa is abusive, when he finally gets around to kicking them in the chops one last time, there's nothing they can do about it. They gave Massa too much power. Now you can go ahead and take your marching orders and your advice from these bootlicks and shills if you want, but just understand the only thing that they can advise you on is how to wind up just like them. You can go ahead and do like them and swallow your pride every single day, swallow your dignity every moment of every day, but one of two things is going to happen. Either there's some part of you that's actually going to wake up and say, you know what, I'm sick and tired of having to swallow my pride every day and I've had enough. Or what's going to happen is, more likely, Massa is simply going to get bored with kicking you around every day. Yeah, Massa gets a kick out of giving these bootlicks a toilet bowl swirly, but there's only so much humiliation you can do with these clowns over and over again before it begins to bore you. And when something fails to amuse Massa, he throws it out. That's the reason why we're standing on our issue and not theirs. That's the reason why we have linked our vote to the issue of cash reparations. That is an excellent issue for us to push because it's political truth serum. It forces everyone to say and show where they stand. When people boldly tell you to your face that they're not going to do anything for you while they do things exclusively for everyone else, that's truth serum at work. You presented them with a subject so dangerous to the status quo that they have no choice but to drop all the pretenses and come flat out and say that they totally oppose it. No beating around the bush. They can't sit here and just be circuitous about it. They gotta say, no, I'm against it. When it comes to every other issue under the sun, they give you all the legalese. They give you all the verbal embroidery. They sit there and just talk and talk and talk in rhetorical circles going nowhere. But as soon as you say cash reparations, all of a sudden, they learn how to speak plainly. Bernie Sanders goes from bloviating for hours on end about the glories of socialism to saying, well, cash reparations, that's not feasible. That's not feasible. Kamala Harris, who never formed a plain sentence times in her entire pathetic life, she goes from just blathering nonsensically to telling you, you think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? No! They know that they have to come out and say it plainly. They can't leave any room for ambiguity whatsoever. Kamala Harris couldn't use weasel words or flowery prose. Her white donors wouldn't approve of that. They wanted her to completely dismiss even the suggestion of black people getting anything. They wanted her to dismiss our demands with contempt, which she did. See, if you stick to the typical Democrat-approved issues like jobs, quote-unquote, or so-called police reform, whatever that is, they have empty talking points and rhetoric at the ready. They've been doing it to us for decades, and we've been going along with it. Those things don't threaten the status quo. They don't change anything, so it's safe to talk about, or rather talk around, those subjects. You can't do that with cash reparations, though. You can't even discuss it. You have to attack it. To even discuss it in a civil manner is to make it part of the regular political discourse. You see what happened in California. Black activists forced cash reparations into the political discourse. And even though black people are only a small percentage of California's voters, you had the governor himself running for cover, telling lies as he decided to try to kill it in secret. Now, if black Californians are a small percentage of the state's population, and they are, and an even smaller number of the voting population, and they are in that state, then the question is, why would the governor be running for cover like that? Why would he have to actually pull some little dirtbag move like that? Why, in a deep blue state where there's no fear of the Republicans winning an election, why would the governor feel that he has to lie like that and he has to hide in the shadows to do his dirt? Why? Because Gavin Newsom and the rest of the DNC leadership were terrified of what black voters outside of California would do if they saw him veto cash reparations. See, what they were scared of was that black voters would look, and not so much that they would switch to the Republicans after this, but that black voters would be so outraged, they would be so disgusted, they would actually stay home. This is an election year after all. And why were they scared of that? Because they saw what happened when Kamala Harris called herself running for president 4 years ago. She crashed and burned. Why? Because even though the California political machine could protect Kamala Harris inside of California, and they could rig the system so that they could just arbitrarily give her every patronage job and every political office that she's ever had, they couldn't do that outside of the state of California. And that's what Kamala found out the hard way. When you go to Detroit and you got a half out of the bag racist like Tulsi Gabbard who insults you to your face, and you got an 80+% black city cheering her on while she insults Kamala Harris, that's how you know outside of California she ain't spit. They saw that happen. They saw black voters actually saying, you know what, this woman who's running around saying that she's a black woman running for office when the rest of the time she says that she's actually Asian, we're not voting for her. We ain't with her. They saw that happen. That's what put the fear of God into them. It wasn't black voters deciding they were going to vote for someone else. It was black voters saying, you know what, we're just staying home. We ain't voting for this person at all. They saw what happened in 2016 when black voters in Michigan and Georgia and Pennsylvania said, to hell with Hillary Clinton. She's still supporting the 94 crime bill. No apologies for anything. No actual agenda for us. We're staying home. That's what scared Gavin Newsom and the Democrats in California. If Gavin Newsom had decided to just go ahead and veto cash reparations, that would have sent shockwaves across the black political spectrum. And that being the case, all of those Gen Xers and millennials who have been the main ones raising all this hell about cash reparations, that would have turbocharged every argument that the pro-reparations crowd had made. And it also would have silenced all of these people out here who were saying, oh, reparations, they ain't gonna talk about it. What it would have shown is the Democrats were against it. They got it all the way to a vote. All that was necessary for the governor to sign off on it, a governor in a deep blue state where there's no fear of Republican voters or white lash or red waves or anything else. And it would have been the Democrats standing against it. They couldn't have those kind of optics, especially not during an election year, because they were terrified of the black vote saying, you know what, we're staying home. Why bother voting for these Democrats? They need us. If we decide that we're not going to be voting for them, then what happens is they lose everything. I guess what they're wondering is, when the heck are we going to wake up to that fact? When are we going to realize the leverage that we have and then start to use it? Now understand, these guys already know that basically if you hit them up for something, if they have to actually give you something, they're going to sit back and wait to see. If we don't give it to them, what will they do? What are the consequences going to be? Let's see if we can discourage them by saying no. And there are a lot of black folks who all you have to do is simply say no to them one time and they just slink off, head down. Oh, okay, I guess I'm done. And then there are other black folks who actually stand on business and say, hell no, this argument ain't over until I get what I'm owed. And as we see in California, it's the black people who actually decide that they're going to stand up for themselves and be relentless. They're the ones who actually make progress while all the rest of them simply get left behind. But guess what? That's how it's supposed to be. The people who don't actually want to have to fight for what's theirs, they shouldn't have anything because they're expecting somebody else to give it to them. Actually, they're expecting you and me to give it to them, and they just sit back with all this defeatist talk and all of this we can't do, when what they're really saying is they don't want to do. Yeah, reparations, cash reparations is truth serum. It separates the people who are actually about the work from the people who don't want to do it at all. Dr. John Henrik Clarke said you cannot have an alliance unless you have the ability to punish the other party if they break the alliance. But I would add to that even having the ability to punish the other party means nothing if you never actually exercise that ability. People have to occasionally be reminded that they better not even think about working against your interests. Everyone else understands the necessity of rattling their partners from time to time, not to break the alliance, but rather as a way to remind their partners that they can walk away whenever they get ready, and they better remember that whenever they deal with them. Like I've always told you, if you want to be liked, then go ahead and say yes to everyone and everything. You say yes to everybody and they'll pretend like they like you because you're a doormat. But if you want to be respected, if you want to get what's yours, and you can't have power without respect, by the way, then you better start learning to say no. No is a powerful word because it forces other people to have to think before they come running up in your face telling you that they want something from you. When people know that they can get from you whatever they want, and they can just depend on you to say yes no matter what, it's not going to be long before they decide to start mistreating you, and when they see that there's no consequences for this maltreatment, then they're going to take you for granted. That's the way that it works. People don't respect you if they can take you for granted. That kind of dynamic immediately turns into abuse. You better start understanding elections as what they are. Bill Moyer said it best, elections are about who gets what. That means that they're transactional. And for too dang long, we haven't been getting anything, and we've just been tolerating it that way. And now there's finally come a group of black folks who have been saying, why are we tolerating this? If you're not actually getting anything tangible for your vote, then voting becomes nothing more than an empty activity. It serves no purpose. So when it comes to that ballot, you better start learning to wield it like a weapon, because that's what it is, if you choose to make it into a weapon of your empowerment. And don't just take my word for it. You got career Democratic operatives like Lawrence O'Donnell who have explained to you they know exactly what's going on, and that the greatest fear that the DNC leadership has is enough people, especially black people, finally waking up and realizing that they have the power to pull the plug on the entire party. Right now, the Democrats see exactly what we're doing, and they're calling themselves playing some half-brained game of political chicken. They already know that if they give in immediately, then it's game over, so they want to see if they can outlast us, if they can get us to actually back down. And our job is to say no. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Wally Belisle, Quincy X, Mark Anderson, Turk McKenzie, and Samora Morris. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.